What is going on, everyone? So it is time for my film reveal video. This is where I take a look at my film. And in the past, I'd do these where it's a first look at the film, but now I think it's a little easier to scan the film first, get to know the images a little bit, and then share some of my thoughts on the various compositions and stuff along those lines. So I have all my film here from my trip in the order that it was taken. And there is one sheet of film from a quick trip I went on in November to a place called The Wave, because a good friend of mine ended up getting a permit to go there. And so myself and several other photographers went there, and it was very windy, and I took just one photo. So let's start with that one. Here is my photo from The Wave, and roughly, I don't know, 20 minutes after this, my camera was slammed to the ground and broke, so I have a habit of doing that. I was able to glue it back together, and it's all good now, but that's my backup camera. I do have another of the exact same camera, which is my primary camera, and that's the one that I used on my trip to Death Valley. So I'm very happy with how this one turned out. When I was setting up this composition, I was really looking at this line, and this line, and trying to find it where we have this swooping line that goes through here, which plays well with this. This was taken when, I can't remember if there was a cloud going over or it was just in subdued light. But I do like the fact that this is a little bit darker back here. There's no way for me to get this area back here in focus, but I am perfectly fine with that because it's all really about this, and this is just a backdrop with some interesting lines. This, I believe, was my 450 millimeter lens, and during a moment of calm when it wasn't all that windy. But very happy with how that turned out, and it is a very cool place to go to, though it's hard to get in there because of the permit process. But it's good to have the permit process because it means it's not going to get overrun with lots and lots of people, which would have an impact on the wilderness experience. So this is my first photo from my trip to Death Valley. And this is a scene I photographed in the past, but I took the photo in the morning, and the light just wasn't all that great. And it's a little bit better here in the early evening. At the time of recording this video right now, I'm still not 100% on my editing for this particular photo. It'll be fine by the time my videos are done, which you have already seen. But it's a little bit of a tough one, trying to balance the color and the contrast and everything. But what I really liked about the scene was just all these lines going in every direction and kind of angling in and then out, and then the debris flow there from the various bits of erosion through the years. And it is an interesting scene. I have a little bit of blue sky right here, just out of view. So I was trying to work around that. But this was my 240 millimeter lens, which is a slight wide angle. But I'm pretty happy with how this turned out, and I'll certainly need to spend a little more time with this one on the computer in order to make it look a bit more like how, well, like this transparency here looks. And I have another one of those as well. Slightly less magenta for the light on this one. But it's far from my best photo from this trip, but it was a good way of getting into the trip. And then another one. This is the one that I scanned. I know that because I put a little piece of tape on the sleeve. And sometimes people will comment like, "Oh, why are you touching the film with your hands and all that?" They're in sleeves, so you don't have to worry about that. But I put a little piece of tape on the sleeve so I'll know which one is the one that I actually scanned. So again, you know, just taking photos through the various windows of light. And I never really know until I actually see it. This is a scene that I photographed on my first full day there. This is not the main glow. The main glow is one I actually photographed on color negative film because it's a pretty intense light. But this particular scene, I came through this canyon last year when I was exploring it a bit more, and I shot some video of me walking through here when this was really glowing. So on this trip I got here ahead of the glow. I set up the composition, and this was at the last moment before the glow got so strong that it was more than what transparency film could handle. But I was really just looking at the flow of this, and you'll see, well, you won't really see too much because it's on color negative film, but this whole thing here glows like crazy a little bit later on. And that's where I was composing this with that in mind. And for scenes like this, I was focusing right about here, and no camera movements or anything, because the moment you start using tilt or anything, you have weird and very unnatural things happening because you have all these, you know, strong verticals in there. So I mean, it's decent. Here is the same scene, a little bit closer to the glow. We have a little more of kind of an orange light in here. But when the glow really gets going, what's happening is the sun is hitting the backside of this right here, and then that is reflecting in here. And so like the whole roof right here of this little alcove will be glowing. So on itself, it's fine, it's decent. And at the time of me recording this, I honestly don't know which one I prefer, this one or the strong glow. There's more subtlety to this. This looks more like reality. When the strong glow hits, it has, I don't know, it has a different look to it, which at the time of recording this, I don't know if I really like or not. So again, color negative, it's gonna be hard to tell. But this right here is gonna be glowing pretty strong. This is glowing strong. These are dark areas here, since this is a negative, this is direct sunlight hitting the wall above it, and there's some direct sunlight hitting there. I did expose another sheet of film, this right here, when the glow, or when it was just all glow here, that direct sunlight is gone. There's a little bit of direct sunlight down there, which is not a bad thing, because it adds a little bit of dimension. But when this is the one that I scanned, but the glow is really strong through here, through here, through here. So all these dark areas here are really glowing quite strong. So, and again, at the time of recording this, I don't know which of those I like better. Sometimes you gotta sit on them for a little while longer. This is a boulder I've tried to photograph in years past. I didn't like the composition I had last time. I'm a little iffy about it this time. I really do like how I was able to put the boulder here up against this pile of eroded debris and have two of those. There's some weird angles at play here. So you'll see I have a little bit of blue sky poking up here. I actually rotated the camera a little bit to avoid getting blue sky in the photo. But also, you know, when I do that, sometimes you can't really tell what a true vertical is, so it looks perfectly fine. But the angle of this right here, you can tell that it is indeed rotated a bit. So when I scanned this, I did experiment with cropping in a little bit and then angling it a little bit. So this is a bit more of a true horizontal. That definitely helped a little bit. I'm not in love with this, but I know I did better with it than the first time I photographed this scene. And it was a nice, calm evening out there. And exact same scene, taken maybe 15 minutes from the other one. The light looks basically the same. Actually, when I photographed this one, it was pretty windy, now that I'm thinking about it. It was that first scene was nice and calm, but I was fighting the wind a little bit when I was setting up this one, but when I actually took the photo, it was fairly calm. So the following morning, I noticed, because I sleep in the back of my 4Runner, and I noticed that there were a little bit of clouds out. And I got up at about 4 a.m. and I had remembered there's this desert holly bush with a really nice unobstructed view of the Panamints. And I knew that this would be a good morning subject. The only thing is that I didn't have the location of that bush marked in the GPS. But since I have a Starlink set up now, I was able to look at the Google map, pinpoint it, and then drive to it and find this bush in the dark. And I set up, and I was a little bummed at first because clouds were only over half the composition. But I set up the camera, set up the composition in the dark, which is really tough to do with a 8x10, just because you can't really see much on the ground glass. So I used my headlamp to shine on here so I can focus on here, then tilt the lens so I can get the top there in focus. But when I was setting this up, I knew that the bush is going to be one dominant part of the composition. The other is going to be this part of the mount here. So I decided to offset them, where the bush a little bit here, the mountain over here, as opposed to centering the bush. And to me, that seemed like that made sense because you had the clouds a bit over here. And then once it was all set up, I put a 2-stop soft grad in, which transitions about halfway through. It's even hard to tell on here. And just started taking pictures at the various windows of light. So this was before any sort of glow is happening, kind of a bit of a safety photo. Followed by this one. And now we're starting to get a little bit of light on those clouds, a little bit of a glow up there. Nothing too strong yet. You can tell something was building, but this was also beyond the window of when these lights would have really lit up before sunrise. And so as a result, I knew that there was a bit of an obstruction off to the east, which can sometimes be a good thing, sometimes be a bad thing. A little bit of clouds building in over here right now. So between these photos, I am not adjusting the camera at all. It's saying exactly where it is. Next window of light, we get a little more light on these clouds here, a little bit of light there. Starting to get a little bit of a warmer tone in the foreground. And again, nothing dramatic, but sometimes nice subtle light can look quite nice. And I never really know what's going to look best, so I just keep working those windows of light. This is when the sunlight started hitting just the very top of the mountains there. And sometimes this is when the show is basically done, because beyond this, it just falls into harsh light. But I still had some film with me, and so I'm just continuing to expose it. I did like how it was lighting up here, the bush is over here, so again you have this little bit of this diagonal relationship between them. I made sure I gave enough room here and here to give that bush enough space, and made sure I gave enough room in the sky just for whatever would happen with the clouds. Any one of these, with the exception of maybe the first, I could probably use and be a decent photo. Sun's getting stronger here. Now, it's starting to max out a little bit because we're hitting snow. It's really bright up there. It's more of a little bit of a harsher morning light. And so, I mean, it felt great when I was taking this photo because things were really lighting up. But looking back at it, I'm a little too bright here. But that's tough to avoid with transparency film. An even darker ND filter would be a bit much. So it's just kind of working within the limitations of the film. I could make this work if I needed to, but I am losing a little bit of tonality up there. But again, foreground's fine. And for the foreground, I'm metering a gray card I'm kind of holding up and then comparing that to what I see for the sky. And again, I was using a 2-stop soft ND filter. This is the one that I went with. Because as the sun was continuing to rise in the sky and there's some clouds to the east, it then blocked the light on the very top ridge right there and was spotlighting with warm light right here. So I'm back within the range of what the film can handle. And yeah, so I was really, really happy with how this turned out. These clouds are kind of moving away. These clouds are filling in, so it balances it. And what I really liked is how the light is just in this area right here. On the left side, the bush is on the right side. So again, it balances. And when I set up my camera that morning, I had no clue what would happen. It's just a matter of finding a composition that works and then working with those various windows of light. And then you learn afterwards what is going to be the best. And again, a 2-stop soft grad gives me good exposure for the bright areas, and then it preserves detail in the foreground. So very, very happy with how that turned out. It's probably one of my favorite mornings ever in Death Valley, just watching the light unfold. So absolutely beautiful. All right, so we transitioned from that really beautiful sunrise that morning to a not great afternoon photo. This was more a matter of trying out this particular location, and I knew setting up the composition that this would be tricky because I wasn't able to get enough height in order to have a better interaction between this boulder and the mountains in the background. If my tripod was up higher, then I think I can get more depth to it, but that's a pretty big boulder, and I'd have to have the tripod up maybe another 3-4 feet higher, which would be tricky. I knew the light was not going to be great here. A little trick I do, so if you watch where the sun is going to set on the horizon, put your hand out one side, and then put your other hand out the other side. So the other side over here, that is not going to be a very flattering angle for the sunlight because you're not going to have a lot of shadow definition back there. It's not going to look quite as good. And that's really what this is. So my hand would have been pointed right here, so there's no shadow definition over here, versus if you look more north, you start to get some of that shadow definition. So I knew it was an uphill battle. Too bright for the exposure here, decent exposure here. In retrospect, a hard edge grad would have been better. Probably even a 3-stop, but usually 3-stop is going to be more for angling towards the sun. So it's just not a very well-suited subject for transparency film for doing that. Here's a little later on. I'm doing decent for the exposure up top. Foreground a little dark, but usable. It's usable, but again, it's just the angle of the light is not great. There's not much subject interaction. Even though there's some clouds, it's not a cohesive subject. A little bit of a story behind this one. So first of all, you see that the light is starting to balance a little bit better as it's getting a little less intense up here. I'm still a little bright on my exposure there. But I meant to turn the dial on my lens to, I think, bulb mode, but instead I turned it to a 1/2 second because I was on 1 second before. So I clicked the shutter because I was meaning to do a 1.5 second exposure. So I clicked the shutter and it was just click, click, like that's not right. So I set it to 1 second, recocked the shutter, clicked it again. So this is actually 2 exposures. But you see in that time the clouds moved a little bit, so it's a little awkward. But I'm not missing out. Though I will say that this sort of little bit of fleeting light is better than a wall of light, as it was for the previous one. Again, not great, but it made me feel productive as I was out there. The light's better here. This one's better balanced. But even with some nice clouds in the sky, it's an issue of subject interaction. This boulder is not interacting with those mountains. It's just almost as though it's 2 separate photos, which is the difficulty of photographing over here. So short of having maybe a really tall tripod or finding some smaller rocks, but then they're not going to stand out as much from this. I think there's potential here, but I did not realize it on this particular attempt. But that is often the case, and one of the reasons why I enjoy revisiting locations. So the following morning, I hiked into this canyon. Now I knew about this glow. This is one that I saw a year or 2 ago when I was hiking through here, and I couldn't quite figure out how to photograph it because I was trying to photograph it looking the other way. It's a classic example of turn around, look at where you were walking from, and there you go. I like this overhanging wall here. I like how this is catching this nice warm reflected light. I like how there's a path for the eye to work your way through there. A little bit of cool tone there, a little bit of warm tone there. I focused right about here. Didn't use any tilts or swings or anything, just kept it normal. And the foreground here is not going to be really in focus, but that's just fine because it gives actually a bit more of a sense of depth. This is at the very limit of what transparency film could do. I was at, positive 1.8, 1.9 there, and negative 1.8 or 1.9 over here. So that's about as bright as I can go without blowing highlights. That's about as dark as I can go without losing detail. And overall, I'm definitely quite happy with how this one turned out. Just one single exposure on it. Though I did expose also a sheet of color negative film, which again, you're gonna have a hard time seeing much other than the fact that, this was glowing, this is dark, and that's dark. But I haven't even scanned this one because I was quite happy with what the transparency film did. Later that evening, I went down to the mudflats, and we have not had very much rain yet this winter, though I'm recording this in first week or so of March, and there's a rainstorm outside because we're finally getting a bit of rain. But it was it's been a very dry and windy winter, and so all the mud tiles are all completely dry. But then because of the wind, you have this coarse sand that's blown in there. This one's a bit bright for the exposure, but I've got this one, which is pretty good. I didn't quite know what to think of this one when I first scanned it, but then when I started working with it, I really did enjoy it. I had to reduce the blue cast a little bit just to differentiate the colors, to get a little bit warm tone out of there, but then to add a little bit of the cool cast again at the end, just to, for the soothing color palette. But I composed this with this streak here across the middle, a little bit over the halfway line. And I like how these are catching some light on there. And it ends up being a pretty calm image, and it has a look that is different from any of the mud tile photos I've taken in the past. So it's a matter of returning to an area and then seeing how it changes and evolves each year. But definitely a pretty cool area. And so I'm glad it was a pretty calm wind when I was taking the photo. So quite happy with how that one turned out. So the following morning, I returned to the same canyon where I photographed that last glow. And on that previous time into the canyon, I noticed this little glow around a corner here where I'm not even fully in this canyon. There's just like this little passageway. But the sunlight is hitting the back of this wall right here, which is sending a glow into here. And so I have two exposures. The next one has a little bit of a better exposure, but this one, you're catching this warm light here. The other thing too is these glows, they can happen really quickly. When I set up this composition, I was looking at the ground glass, everything was quite drab. And then I noticed all of a sudden the glow just started like that as the sun started hitting back there. I used my wide angle lens, so 150 millimeter wide angle, trying to avoid these guys going into the corners. It's just a matter of trying to figure out how much to include on either side. Exposure was tricky, but I was just making sure I had detail there and I had detail there. Provia certainly goes a bit bluish, but I think that's just fine because you get this warm, cool thing going on. And then here's a better exposure of that scene. So a little stronger glow perhaps, and a little more light filling in because the sun is hitting off a wall behind me, so it minimizes the blue a little bit. But definitely quite happy with how that one turned out. All right, so this is a subject where I was very excited to photograph it. It's a subject that I stumbled upon, I think a couple of years ago, when I visited this canyon for the first time, and I had just finished photographing a subject further up the canyon. And when I was hiking out of the canyon, I hiked through this area, I set up a video shot, but I really liked the way that this large chunk of the canyon wall was just cradled by all these walls here. And these glows, they usually have a rather limited window of opportunity, because what's happening is that direct sunlight is hitting the back of this canyon wall right here, which is then reflecting in the scene. But before that window of light, you have direct sunlight hitting this boulder here. Then after that window of light, it starts spilling over here. So there's maybe 30 or 40 minutes when it glows really nicely. And the light changes a little bit during that window. It initially starts by illuminating here, and then it's illuminating a little bit more over here as the light continues to swing around the back of this. Now, the day before I took this photo, I was set up to photograph this exact same subject, but not knowing how long that window of light was. By the time I settled on a composition, direct sunlight started spilling into the scene. So I wasn't able to photograph it that day, but you know, this stuff runs on a schedule. So just so long as it's nice and sunny, I head back there the following day and I'm good to go. Now, I'm glad it didn't work out that first day because the composition I selected on that first day is not what you see here. When composing a scene like this, I have that little plastic frame I hold up, which allows me to see how everything balances. And sometimes if I have a couple possible solutions, I'll set it up and then I take my phone and I basically frame it the exact same way. And then I'll take maybe 2 pictures of 2 slightly different compositions and then flip between them and see which one I like more. And the day before I took this, I had selected a composition that had notably more foreground because I thought it would add more flow to the scene. But when I returned back to camp that evening, I was planning on how to photograph this the following day. I was reviewing those photos again and found that the one with much less foreground was a much stronger composition, which is what you see here. Because without having as much foreground, basically you're led directly to that rock right there. If I had more foreground, like if I had down to, say, here, you have more of the wash here. Instead of this meandering path here, which might seem like a good thing, but it really was taking attention away from that rock. And so I'm really glad it worked out the way it did, and that I just barely missed the window of light on my first attempt because it allowed me to rethink things a little bit more. I'm very happy with how this one turned out. So this is at the very beginning of my window of light. You'll see some changes over here as I get a little bit later into the window of light. So this is a little bit later on, but it's quite similar to the first one. It's maybe 5-10 minutes apart from the first photo, because I never really know exactly how it's going to be until I see the photo. This is toward the end of the window of light, and so you see there I'm catching more of a glow here. It's a subtle difference. I'd be perfectly fine with the other ones, but given the choice, I like the fact that there's more of a glow on here, because it just gives that extra sense of depth. There was a really large red rock right here, which was really annoying. So I actually rolled that back around that rock right there. I think it was pretty heavy. And then this one is a little bit bright for the exposure. This one would also be just fine, but I'm starting to lose a little bit of definition in some of those areas. But you see I have a pretty strong glow there, but I believe it was the previous one that I actually scanned. But very, very happy with how that turned out. This is the same scene in color negative, which I did not need because the Provia did fine. And this is Portra 160. The following morning, I actually went for a bike ride. There's toward the southern end of the park, there's a road that climbs from the valley floor up to a pass that's about a little over 3,000 feet. So it's going from like below sea level up to over 3,000 feet, just along like 14 miles of continuous climbing for the most part, and then rode back down. I gotta tell you, going downhill for 14 miles continuously, it's actually more tiring in a way than going uphill because you have to be very vigilant about everything with the road and stuff. But the day after that, I returned to that same canyon because there was this scene with these white boulders here. It's okay. It's not as good as some of the other photos I've taken in there. One thing that bothered me a little bit is this rock right here, which is standing up vertically. So I took this photo, and then it occurred to me that I could probably move that rock. So this next photo here, that rock is hidden behind this rock. So, you know, little modifications like that. Not such a bad thing. A little better glow on this one anyways, a little bit of a warmer light. It's okay. I don't know. Maybe it's the sort of thing where if it's in like a collection of work, it's fine, but I don't think it stands on its own quite as well as, you know, like that previous subject with the glow in the canyon. This is a subject that I had my eye on for hiking out of the canyon. I always look for subject interaction, and you know, despite being somewhat, you know, phallic in nature, I did like the fact that you have these two subjects right here. This one kind of slumped over. Almost looked like there's like two individuals, and they're, you know, kind of at odds with each other, you know, whatever. But some desert holly there, some rubble there, kind of more of a bluish tone. But I thought it was interesting. Anything where you have some sort of subject interaction, some sense of story. So that was kind of a fun subject. And then when I was nearly down the alluvial fan, I came across this, this is an old dead desert holly bush, which is flattened, and it just looks like it's protecting this rock here. This is very blue because I was in shade. I thought I'd get a little more warm light on it than I did. But even though it is quite blue, I can still work with that quite well in Photoshop and restore some of the other tones that are in there. You see a little bit of warm tone in some of these other like weeds and plants and stuff that are in there. I believe it was the next one here that I scanned. This is a brighter exposure, a little more detail to work with. And so what I really liked as far as, you know, composing this scene is I wanted to include this. I wanted to chop this off a little bit because there's a flow around here. And the thing I was trying to figure out is how much of this to include, how much of this to include. And that's where having that little composing device really helps out, because you can just move it around and you get a feeling for how much of it you really need to have. At first glance, when I looked at this film, I thought that I got the composition wrong. But after scanning it, I'm quite satisfied with the decisions I made in terms of that and in terms of that. I was able to warm it up a bit, but to me, this is a sort of subject that can evoke emotion, because it's kind of like this whole, like, you know, trying to protect this rock and it's like dying grass, you know, kind of thing going on. And so it was a nice subject to stumble upon and to have it be my final photo from this year's visit. So overall, I'm very satisfied with the work from this year's trip. I didn't do as much exploring as I would like. It was mostly revisiting places that I'd been in the past, but every time I go back there, I'd find more and more stuff. But now that I have, you know, kind of worked with those photos, I gotta finish doing the videos and everything. But hopefully this was in some ways helpful. But I want to thank everyone for watching, and we'll see you around next time. You may have noticed this video has no ads and no sponsors, and I think it's nicer that way. If you enjoy this ad-free and clickbait-free content and want to help me live my dream, a voluntary contribution through PayPal or by joining my Patreon helps keep my gas tank full and my film freezer stocked. You can find more information by visiting my website at benhorne.com/donate. I also have prints, ebooks, and my annual portfolio is available on my website. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you around next time.